My name is Zach Arnold. I'm a Hollywood film and television editor, a documentary director, father of two, an American Ninja Warrior in training, and the creator of Optimize Yourself. Whether you're a creative professional, an entrepreneur, a weekend warrior, or even a professional athlete, I strongly believe that it is no longer necessary to sacrifice your health in order to be successful. Throughout my own career, I have battled attention issues, anxiety, burnout, and back in 2005, after almost losing the battle with suicidal depression, I had had enough. I was done barely surviving. I wanted to thrive. Since then, I have obsessively searched for every possible way to optimize my own creative and athletic performance. And now I want to shorten your learning curve so you can forge your own path to greatness without sacrificing your sanity in the process. You ready? Let's get started designing the optimized version of you. Hello and welcome to episode 57 of the Optimize Yourself podcast. Whether you're a first-time listener or a seasoned veteran, I'm grateful to have you here, and I appreciate you prioritizing this time in your day to allow me to inspire you to live just a bit further outside your comfort zone so you can feel empowered to realize your greatest potential. Now, to ensure that you don't miss future episodes, I invite you to subscribe to this podcast in iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or whatever app you prefer, because I have tons of great guests, giveaways, and free training coming your way on a weekly basis. Just visit optimizeyourself.me/subscribe to make sure that you don't miss future episodes and to access our index of past episodes. My guest today is Noah Arnold. He is a veterinarian and a business owner who runs his own veterinary clinic in Shorewood, Wisconsin, and he does it in a very unique way, to say the least. Now, before going any further, if you're wondering why in the world I would interview a veterinarian on a podcast that's all about reaching your full creative potential, trust me, this is one of the best and most inspiring stories that you will ever hear, especially if you're a freelancer or a small business owner that's struggling to build your own niche. Now, Noah did all of the right things. He took all the right classes, he got the right degrees, and he landed the right jobs. He had 2.4 kids. Well, actually, he has 3 kids. He has a car payment, and he had a mortgage. He was doing everything that he was told to do in order to be happy, except that he was miserable. Needless to say, living the life that he was supposed to live was slowly killing Noah. In order to get to the point where he had the freedom to build a business his way so he could pursue his passion and fulfill what he believes is his true purpose in life, and by the way, that purpose is serving animals and serving people who love animals, he had to summon the courage to escape his old life of desperately trying to conform and fit into the corporate world of animal medicine. In our discussion today, Noah gives us an incredibly candid look into his journey and what inspired him to give up a life of comfort and security so that he could take a huge risk, bet it all, and pursue his dream. If you have ever felt stuck, lost, or you've asked yourself, is this really all there is? Then you don't want to miss this interview. I've released over 180 podcasts now, and I can honestly say that this is the first interview that ever brought me to tears. And I challenge you to make it all the way through without choking up at least once. Finally, as a full disclaimer, similar to my previous interview with world-renowned Instagram street photographer Daniel Arnold, and that's episode 54 if you're interested, Noah also happens to be my cousin, and by the way, he's Daniel's younger brother. So needless to say, I am extremely blessed to have such passionate, creative, and wonderful people in my family. This isn't simply because I have run out of people to interview, trust me. Before we get to our interview, I'd like to thank the company Adobe for not only supporting this podcast and the Optimize Yourself movement, but also for being kind enough to provide me with 4 yearly subscriptions to Adobe Creative Cloud that I can then give to you. Now, for those that might not be aware, Creative Cloud is an essential package of video creation tools such as Premiere, After Effects, and Audition. These are tools that I personally can't live without, whether I'm working in the web, in TV, or on film projects. To win yourself a yearly subscription to this awesome suite of creative tools, all you have to do is leave an honest review for this podcast in iTunes or Apple Podcasts. It is seriously that simple. I'm going to do 1 drawing per month for October, November, December, and January. To learn more about the great products that Adobe Creative Cloud has to offer, all you have to do is visit optimizeyourself.me/Adobe. And if that isn't enough to get you excited, you can also enter to win the 12-month Pro Plan from my newest sponsor, Frame.io. If you're not familiar with Frame.io, it is an amazing online collaboration tool where you can comment and interact directly with your videos, providing instant feedback rather than constantly going back and forth via endless email chains while you're doing revisions to your videos. And you know how I feel about email and productivity. To learn more about frame.io, just visit optimizeyourself.me/frameio. And for clarification, that's frame.io with no periods or spaces. And don't forget to leave that podcast review on iTunes to be entered to win. All right, without further ado, after a brief break to recognize my other sponsors who are literally making this interview possible for you today, my interview with veterinarian Noah Arnold. To access the show notes for this episode, please visit optimizeyourself.me/episode 57. This episode is made possible for you by ErgoDriven, the makers of the TopoMat, my number one recommendation for anybody who stands at their workstation. The Topo is super comfortable, an awesome conversation starter, and it's also scientifically proven to help you move more throughout the day, which helps reduce discomfort and also increase your focus and productivity. To learn more and get your TopoMat, visit optimizeyourself.me/topo. That's TOPO. This episode is also made possible for you by Sit Tight, my new number one recommendation if you're searching for a healthier, more ergonomically friendly office chair that turns sitting into an activity that actually improves your health rather than damaging it. Yes, you can actually get fit while you sit. If you've never seen one, just imagine the most comfortable bar stool on the planet on top of a Bosu ball. Just trust me, it's awesome. If you want to learn more about how the Sit Tight can provide fitness for your body, focus for your mind, and fun for your spirit, just visit optimizeyourself.me/sit-tight and use the coupon code OPTIMIZE for 10% off your order. I'm here today with Dr. Noah Arnold. And Arnold, that's an unfamiliar last name to me. I'm pronouncing that correctly, am I not?
You got it, man.
Got it. Okay, so Dr. Noah Arnold, who is the proprietor and the creator of Dr. Noah's Ark, and you also just happen to be my cousin. And I'm super excited to have you on this podcast interview with me today. So thanks so much for taking the time to do it.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited to be here.
So the impetus for doing this interview is I just kind of ran out of people to interview and nobody would respond to my emails. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to start interviewing my family because I've got to fill up airtime. So, I'm going to reach out to my cousins and you were the first one on the list. So,
all right, I'll take it.
So no, the reason that we're here really has very little or nothing to do with the fact that we're related and we've basically known each other since birth. The reason that we're here is because I love talking to people that do things their own way and are unapologetic about being authentic. And that really is what this show is going to be about because you've chosen a very unique path in your career as a veterinarian. And I really want to go into much more depth into your practice and how you've done it and all that. But first, I just kind of want to understand the origin story of how we get to the meat of the story. So really, to start, just kind of tell my audience a little bit about you, because most likely, unless they're in Shorewood, Wisconsin, they've probably never heard of you or your practice.
I guess the best place to start is the start. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the second oldest of 6 kids. I was always trying to make people laugh. I was always the clown. I was actually voted class clown in my high school of, there were 400 kids in my class. And that was like a great accomplishment for me. And, it was ever since I was a little kid, I was always in trouble. I was always trying to make a spectacle of myself. And in the context of a classroom or a workplace, it wasn't very well received. And, because of that quality in a classroom setting, I didn't pay very much attention. I didn't get very good grades. I got sent to detention a lot. And there wasn't much hope for a great success story. My parents used to say, if we can keep you alive through high school, we've done our job. And when I was 15 or 16, I met a girl who was, I think, the first person that really had confidence in my intelligence and in my capabilities. And I remember being that age, 16, 17, 18, and having this sense that I could do absolutely anything that I wanted to do. And I always wanted to be a vet. I mean, from when I was a little kid, I loved animals and wildlife, especially. And it was my great dream. And it was an impossible dream. It was like vet school was totally out of reach for somebody with a 1.9 GPA in high school. And I remember reading the book Into the Wild and being so taken by the main character, Chris McCandless, his ambition to just follow exactly what he perceived to be the right path in the world. And that inspired me to just unapologetically pursue what I wanted to do. And it took a long time, and I worked my butt off, and I made it through vet school, and it was my dream to be a wildlife vet. And I ended up in Sitka, Alaska, working at the Alaska Raptor Center, living off the coast of Sitka in a lighthouse that the vet I worked for had built back in the 70s. And it was incredible. I mean, it was totally incredible. But it was lonely. I always had this sense that if I got to the right place geographically, that everything else would kind of fall into place. And what I realized is, it's a cliche, and I think the name of a book, but, wherever you go, there you are. And, the things that I had maybe run from in my home in Milwaukee, I found waiting for me in Alaska, but in the absence of my friends and my family. And I recognized that wildlife really wanted to kill me more than be helped by me. And I made the decision that I wanted to change gears and become a small animal vet. So that, I want to leave room for some more pointed questions, but that is kind of the origin story.
Well, I definitely want to dig in deeper because anytime you ask somebody about their path, I always inevitably find that they choose what I believe to be one of the most monumental turning points or shifts or journeys that they went through, and they go through it in half a sentence to a sentence at most. It's like, oh my god, no, I want to hear about that. So there's definitely stuff that I want to unpack more. First one, and I'm coming at this having just a little bit of secondhand knowledge, given that we have some family members in common. If you're willing to talk about it, having said that you obviously came out of high school with less than ideal grades and less than ideal portfolio for somebody to say, oh yeah, no, of course we should have him in this prestigious program. Can you talk through, because you say I worked really hard, I did whatever it took, but I really want to define that and I want to break that down. So explain to me the process of actually getting into this program and then getting through it? Because I've heard that it was not the easiest process for you.
Yeah, no question. So, when I graduated from high school, I wasn't able to get into the university that I wanted to, which was Stevens Point, which had a really good wildlife program. I remember being, 17 or 18 and getting the rejection letter and tears streaming down my chubby little boy cheeks. And I ended up at the University of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, UWM, which was the only place I could get in just based on test scores. And, for better or for worse, I've always had at least an aptitude for learning, whether I perceived it at the time or not. And I also had this incredible sense of willpower and dedication where instant gratification was not something I sought. I kind of looked 10 steps ahead. And, I remember watching the movie Rudy, where, he can't get into Notre Dame and he goes to the community college and finally gets in. And it was that idea, that that a year into college, if I just got perfect grades, I could do whatever the hell I wanted, and high school would be erased. And it was true. I mean, I set up a schedule of really difficult courses, calculus and chemistry and all that. And I worked my ass off. I mean, I remember being in the library on Saturday nights when all my friends were out partying and being motivated by it, knowing that I was pursuing a long-term goal rather than just trying to have fun. And I got straight A's for a few years in a row. And my friends were generally the people that weren't able to get into out-of-state schools and weren't very ambitious and were making bad choices and weren't in college. And it wasn't an environment that fostered my ambitions. And so I transferred to the University of Minnesota with my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. And we moved to Minneapolis, and it was a much more rigorous and more difficult program. And I found that a lot of the courses that I had taken didn't transfer. I hadn't looked into that prior to transferring, which is one of my qualities, that I just kind of let the river take me where I want to go without real thought about the difficulties that I might encounter. And that was one of those difficulties, was that I had to be in school for an extra couple of years relative to if I had stayed home. But I, again, just, suffered through academia. I mean, I remember sitting in a physics class and just making like frown faces on my notebook because I was so miserable and feeling like I was in a after school special, going home and I mean, I'm not much of a drinker, but I remember after one organic chemistry test where I just went home and like straight out of a movie, opened up a bottle of Jack Daniels and didn't get too very drunk, but it was just this, I was pretty miserable. And because of my continued sort of class clown persona, I remember classmates of mine in college just totally writing me off as a goof and a not very serious student. But in the face of that, I ended up getting better grades than them, because even though the outward facade was one of kind of indifference, within me was this real desire to succeed. And I did, and I got into vet school in Madison after one rejection. I was rejected and spent a year working at a vet clinic to increase my, to improve my resume, and ended up getting in. And it was, I remember having the feeling when I got into vet school, I had this sense that I had entered a marathon race without having trained. Even though I'd worked my butt off in undergrad, the level of difficulty and intensity was incredible. I mean, it was like nothing I'd ever experienced. And I just gave myself over to it. I mean, I would stay at the vet school and study until midnight and go home and sleep and come back and start again at 7 o'clock in the morning. And I did it every single day for years. And it was the most difficult thing I've ever done. I mean, it was without much gratification. The grades would come in and they would be fine, A's and B's. If you dropped below a B average, you'd be on academic probation. If you didn't get above that, 2.9 within the next semester, you could be kicked out of school. And it motivated me to just really power through it. And I remember having this sense with a lot of the courses I was taking and with the experience overall, that things that initially seem impossible and things that you think you may never be able to do within even just a few weeks, all of a sudden, you find yourself able to do them. And that's a theme that I've kind of called upon throughout my life, where initially I was met with rejection or difficulty, but through perseverance was able to not just get the hang of it, but to excel.
Well, I can definitely tell you that you are amongst good company when you say that. And anybody that listens to this on a regular basis, they're like, "Oh, okay, now I see why he's on the podcast. It's not just a family thing. All right, this makes sense." Because I mean, what's really bizarre, and I want to make sure that people understand this just as a little bit of background. You and I really didn't grow up together. We knew each other as very young cousins, but by the time I was 10 and you were about 7, I had moved much farther north in Wisconsin. And then we saw each other like maybe, I don't know, twice, maybe 3 times total. So for anybody thinking, oh, this all makes sense, you and I really had completely different upbringings. You're in a very, not, I don't want to say urban environment, like you weren't in downtown Milwaukee, but you lived in a city. I grew up on, a farm 13 miles away from a town of 400 people. Uh, and what's interesting is that I'm living in Los Angeles, working in Hollywood, and you're working with animals, and you're a vet. So the irony of that isn't lost on me. But I want to make sure that my audience really kind of gets that, even though we had very divergent paths, our stories are really similar. And the couple of things that I want to pull out of that I think are so key are, first of all, you saying Rudy. I was just like cheering and yelling with my microphone. I'll be like, yes, like that's one of my favorite inspirational stories. But I think the other key where I'm sure a lot of my regular listeners just perked up immediately was when you said, I wasn't really interested in immediate gratification. I was looking 10 moves ahead, which is basically the foundation of everything I teach, is that life is a game of chess. It's not a game of checkers. But when you're that age, most people don't think that way. And I was the same way, where on Saturday nights, I'd be in the edit suite editing student films and people's wedding videos and all kinds of crap while all my friends were out doing stuff. So I'm at least glad to know I'm not the only Arnold nerd in the family. That's very,
no question.
and you also use the word marathon. And that's also the way that I will look at trying to overcome any type of obstacle or trying to achieve what seems to be an impossible goal, is that it really is a marathon and so many people want to sprint. And it would be very easy to go online and do a quick search for Dr. Noah Arnold or Noah's Ark and see videos of you on Inside Edition or NBC or wherever. Be like, oh, how cool, this young vet. He's like an overnight success. Good for him. You're like, there's nothing overnight about this. So what I want to talk about next, now that we've gone through more in detail about some of the struggles that you had both getting into a good school and then what you did to get into vet school, which in and of itself, it doesn't matter whether or not you have great grades or not. Just getting into a vet school as good as University of Madison, that's no easy feat for anybody, especially somebody with a 1.9 GPA that was officially voted the class clown. Kudos to you, by the way, for that.
Yeah, thank you.
So what I want to talk about now, which I think is, to me, one of the most interesting parts of the story, is where things progressed after you graduated from vet school.
Yeah, no question. And, I think to take one step back to my 4th year of vet school, one of the kind of defining moments for me was that I initially, in the first part of my clinical year, where you spend a lot of your time in the teaching hospital, there were opportunities for externship. And a lot of my classmates, ended up going 2 miles down the road to a small animal practice. And I wanted to be in Alaska. And that's where I went. I spent 2 months in Alaska during that externship process, where it was very casual, where they treated me as if I was a doctor, where I was on a first name basis with the other doctors. And I came back to vet school with this sort of nonchalance. And I have this quality about me, kind of the more nervous I get about something, the more calm and collected I make my appearance. And so, vet school in your 4th year is really pretty stringent. And it's almost like a hazing process where they keep you up all night and they make you work your butt off and they put you in front of a room full of, doctors and have you give presentations. And it terrified me. I was not used to being in that sort of arena. And I muddled through by giving this appearance of being totally calm. And I think it incited my instructors to be harder on me. And one particular story is that I was in a cardiology internship within the veterinary hospital. And there was a woman who had more, I mean, she had like a full alphabet after her name, had multiple PhDs, and her name was Dr. Steppen. And I remember going in the first day and saying, "Hi, Rebecca." And she said, "What did you just call me?" And I said, "Rebecca." And she said, "My name is Dr. Steppen." And that set the tone. I mean, she was on me for the entire 2-week internship. And at the end of it, told me that I didn't have enough of a professional demeanor and that I needed to be humbled. And so she was going to make me repeat the rotation. You only get one chance to repeat a rotation, and not just that particular one, but any of them within the 4th year, which is a full 365 days without a break. And I was right at the start of it, and I had already used up my one strike, and it terrified me so much that I was going to be kicked out of school. $100,000 in, and having worked my butt off for the past decade, purely based on my personality. And the reason I bring up that story is that is exactly what happened when I became a vet. I went out into the working world as this very gregarious, goofy personality. And when you're a new doctor working under somebody else who's trying to maintain this environment that's very professional, it's frowned upon. And I remember, I do all my exams sitting on the floor. And I remember a doctor that I worked with taking me aside and said, "Hey, you can't sit on the floor." And I remember telling my clients to call me Dr. Noah, and being told, "No, you're Dr. Arnold," and really being pushed into this sort of classic representation of what a doctor is supposed to be and supposed to act like. So I worked at that particular clinic for a few years, and was in Madison at the time, and we had a baby, and my wife was pregnant with our second baby. And we were spending so much time going back and forth to Milwaukee, which is like a 2-hour drive, that we decided to move, which was a huge undertaking. We had purchased a house. I was established at a practice. It had taken me years to finally develop enough of a clientele such that I could, have appointments on the books every day. And we basically started over. And I remember the experience of, I had 2 months between deciding I was going to leave, to sell my house, to find a new job, and to make it all work. And it was a really anxiety-provoking time. 2 weeks into starting the new job with the new house and having sold the old one, it was like, everything had settled and I was comfortable. And I had this feeling that this sense of security that we so often neglect our true ambition for is really not so necessary as we perceive it to be. And the leaps that we want to take in life are really not so huge as we perceive them to be. And to be stifled and to not go after what you really want based on being afraid of making that leap. Man, if I had given into that fear, I would still be at a practice where I was not appreciated and forced to be a person I wasn't. And so I was at this new practice in Milwaukee, and it was the same thing. I basically a year in was told, we don't want you going up in the front, because when you're juggling and kissing babies, it reflects poorly on the rest of us. For 3 years, I worked at this clinic in Milwaukee, and was met with that same criticism from my colleagues that I wasn't professional enough. And I'm not professional in the way I interact with people in the classical sense, but I connect with them on a human level rather than, me being the doctor and them the client or the patient. I connected with them in a way where we were both people, in this world trying to accomplish the same things, trying to, have a good life free of discomfort and make a good life for our children, etc. And so I left that practice with $100,000 of student loans, with no savings, and with the knowledge that I had worked way too hard and too long to have to edit myself, to have to restrict how I actually was. And I started Dr. Noah's Ark Veterinary Clinic kind of predicated on this idea that I was just going to unapologetically be exactly how I was, that I was going to create a clinic where it was like going into somebody's living room. And then that's what I created. I created this very laid back environment with, it's such a cliche because every coffee shop in the damn world looks this way, but vet clinics don't. So, with reclaimed barnwood and Edison lights and rugs and lamps. And I'm a singer and a songwriter, and I hung a guitar in each of the exam rooms. And it was just this total embracing of who I was. And it was incredible how well it was received. I started in February of last year with no clients and have been sitting on this floor playing songs and doing magic tricks for kids and juggling and doing somersaults and handstands and acting like a crazy person. And fast forward to right now, there are over 2,000 clients, nearly 3,000 patients, and the schedule is booked out for weeks. And each day is, the schedule starts full, and then I have 10 or 15 fit-in appointments. And it is, you look at the typical progress of a veterinary clinic, and you look at the statistics, and it takes 5 or 6 years to get to this point, if you ever get here. And I was there, 6 months in. So it's been a really unexpected and really validating success.
Well, one of the things that I think is so important to point out, and you kind of, you gave away the big reveal, but that's okay, no problem.
Yeah,
is that it's one thing to walk away from security and comfort, like you talked about, because I think that one of the worst things for people today is security and comfort, and I think that we have spent so many years in our modern society spending billions of dollars making ourselves as comfortable as possible and making our lives convenient, and it's making all of us weaker as human beings. And that's I could go on a much larger soapbox and a longer diatribe all about that. But the fact that you decided, you know what, I spent all this time and all this money and I've made it, and this sucks, and this is not who I am, and it's not what I want at all. That's
exactly
terrifying.
Yeah.
That is a terrifying feeling that I have gone through myself, and not something I went through years and years ago, something that I went through about 4 or 5 years ago, which coincidentally is when I think I began my blog and podcast. I'm guessing there was a connection there, but you just realize that you have this image in your head. You're going to college, you're killing yourself, you're Rudy, you're getting your good grades, even though everybody's telling you, you're not going to do it, kid. You just give it up, right?
Right.
So you have this in your mind. You go to vet school. You're thinking, oh my God, I'm going to flunk out of this because this teacher says I'm not professional and I got to change my personality and get through this. And then you finally make it. You reach, quote unquote, the dream, and you say, this is not what I want. I've spent so much of my life getting to this point. I have it. and it's not what I thought it would be. And for most people, that's kind of where they just resign to saying, well, this is my life. And what I want you to just go into a little bit deeper, because I too am all about the human connection. Rather than talking about the details or the story, we've already kind of gone over all this information.
Yeah.
What I want to talk about is that moment, because it's a very important, pivotal, transformational moment for some people. And for others, it just becomes this weight. And what I want you to actually talk about is how it felt. I don't really want to talk so much about the superficial details, but just think back to when you had just sold your house, bought the new one, you're at another clinic, and you're like, holy, this is it, and it's not going to get any better. What did that feel like?
It felt disappointing. I mean, it felt like for so long, had held on to this notion of what I could be if I just kept plugging away. And what I realized was that I was still under somebody else's thumb, that I was still being pushed into a personality that I wasn't comfortable with. And it felt, I pictured that I'd hit this plateau where I wasn't ever going to get out of it. It was as good as it was going to get, and it wasn't that good. And it was disheartening.
Well, the way that I can explain it for me, having gone through a similar process, the way that it felt to me was like somebody had handed me a 100-pound weight vest and I was wearing it 24 hours a day. It was just like this dead weight on me that I'm like, I don't know how to get this weight off of me. I feel like I can't breathe. I can't concentrate. Everything is harder. It would cause a lot of stress. And if this is something you're willing to talk about, I've been very, very open about my past history with dealing with depression and anxiety and other attention issues. And I don't know that much about your specific background, but I know that I'm not the only Arnold that has been blessed with these genetic superpowers.
No question. Yeah, I mean, I have really struggled with anxiety and with depression. And a big source of that was that what was within me belied my outer self, that I was trying so desperately to be a person that I wasn't. I remember that I would just turn bright red at, the drop of a hat if another doctor approached me to talk about a case. If I was in an exam room with a person that I perceived to be very upstanding, stately, responsible, that, I felt that I was trying to fit into this mold that really wasn't me. And yeah, I mean, the anxiety, it was interesting because I would be so anxious at work, so afraid that somebody was going to talk to me and I was going to go beat red and, get tachycardic where my heart was beating out of my chest and not be able to express myself in a way that I knew that I could. And then it gave way to really crushing depression as I left for the day. I'd go home and I would lament my inability to access kind of my essence. And it went on like that for years. And truthfully, it could have gone on forever. It was in that state of constant anxiety, giving way to depression. I was able to make a good living. I was able to be a husband and a father. From the outside, from an outside perspective looking in, I had it all. I had arrived. And if I were using that metric, I would have stayed there. But a far more important metric for me was to be true to myself, which is such a cliche, but it's this idea that there is more than one way to do this thing, not just being a vet, but being an adult and being a person, and to try to conform to this idea of what other people think it should be and what many people are, in spite of the fact that wasn't actually me. That was not the life I wanted.
Well, and I think that the key word here, as you've already been saying, is authenticity. It's all about being authentic to other people, but more importantly, yourself. And the reason that I wanted to go even deeper into kind of that guttural feeling and the result of feeling this lack of authenticity, it manifested itself in you as depression and anxiety. And I've experienced a lot of that as well. And the reason I bring it up is that you are an incredibly highly, like if there was a spectrum, you're on the farthest end of the spectrum as far as creativity is concerned. I would suspect anyway, just based on our conversations and knowing you, clearly creativity is a guiding force in your life. It is a huge part of who you are. And to think of yourself as a highly creative, emotional, sensitive person and being a veterinarian, those two, three, four things don't all really go together very well. We all have this image of what a vet is, right? If I said veterinarian to anybody, close your eyes and picture it, everybody's going to have a very, very similar picture. You don't fit that picture. You don't fit that mold. And why I think it's so important to acknowledge that is most of the people, if not all of the people that listen to the show, also work in creative fields. And a big theme is anxiety and depression and attention issues. And of course, I like to talk about getting down to brass tacks. And, it's important to get more sleep and to, eat a less inflammatory diet, making sure that you're moving and exercising, because all of these things are good for depression and anxiety. And from a biological perspective, all that's true. But on a much deeper emotional level, you can do all of those things and none of it goes away because you're not realizing that this depression or this anxiety is just driven by living an inauthentic version of my life that I just don't feel like I fit within. And probably the most profound thing I ever learned that was just this giant light bulb moment is that depression is just anger turned inwards. And there's a level of me being angry at myself for either things I had done or the position I put myself in. So does any of that make sense to you, or am I just totally rambling?
No, I mean, it definitely makes sense. I mean, and it goes back to what I said previously about kind of from an outsider's perspective, living this perfect life where, and I was eating well, I was riding my bike to work every day. I was doing things that from the perspective of what you're supposed to do to find comfort and happiness in this world, I was doing all of them. And it really was that sacrifice of my authentic self that underlied all of the anxiety and depression that I felt. And I think it's a really good point about anger turned inwards, because there was so much anger at myself for knowing that I had this potential, that I had this ability to relate to people on this very personal level and to explain seemingly difficult concepts in a very accessible way, that I wasn't able to tap into that in the scene that I found myself. And I felt like I was wasting it, that I had this electrical charge in me that was not hooked up, that it was this well of energy and love that I just hadn't tapped into. I'm sure that the natural sequitur is that I've found a way to tap into that. And the anxiety and the depression, although they still exist, they exist more as motivation to continue on this path and to not be led astray, to not be driven by financial gain, to not be pushed by all the voices, the chorus of voices around me telling me what way to go. And I think it's that restlessness that where I'm not comfortable in my security that keeps pushing me to just unapologetically go after who I want to be and what I want to accomplish.
And again, I've already kind of hit this point, but I really want to hit it again, is that when you're at this point where you're leaving the practice that you were working at before you started your own, I can see somebody, and I don't know if maybe this actually happened, but I'm imagining this moment where you've made this decision. I'm $100,000 in debt. I've got a home. I've got these young kids, but I don't care. I'm going to do something that's authentic. And one of your fellow colleagues that really is compassionate and is a friend of yours saying, you know what? You do what you need to do and best of luck. And, what's more important is you need to build something that you love. Making it a successful business, don't worry about that. It's okay if you don't get clients. Just be authentic, be creative, be yourself. And, that's really all that you can ask for. I can kind of picture a conversation like that in my mind. And then you coming back a year and a half later and saying, so got myself 2,000 clients. How you doing?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting because the opposite conversation happened over and over again where people told me, the likelihood of success in a saturated veterinary market in a city that has established veterinary clinics that have been around for 60 years and have a devoted clientele, to try to insert yourself into that, there's no way. There's no way that you're going to be successful in the short term in a way that you're going to be able to support your family. And there was one voice that contradicted that. And that came from a veterinarian that I worked for in Alaska named Burgess Botter, who had left Texas, where he grew up in the 1960s, and went to Sitka, Alaska, and started a vet clinic. Didn't charge for veterinary service. He would open for 2 to 3 hours a day. And he worked on a barter system where the people in the town would bring him fish that they'd caught or, king crabs that they had harvested. He had a very modest lifestyle, and he had built these lighthouses on the islands that surrounded the coast. Would have like a weekend bed and breakfast where he would shuttle people out. He had these ways to make a living while still doing exactly what he wanted to do. And he and I spoke before I started the clinic, and I let him know my dissatisfaction with the field, which he had warned me about. He had told me there's a lot of ego, and there's a lot of pressure to be a certain type of person. And when I talked with him about the struggles that I'd had over 6 years as a veterinarian, he said, get out of there. He said, there's no reason, with all that you've done and with the fact that you've gotten to the point where you are a veterinarian, there's no reason you should be waking up every day unhappy to go to work. To talk with somebody that had given up his comfort and his security and was living a really modest lifestyle, from the perspective of our society, low income and without, the new iPhone, without any phone for that matter, that to have him express to me his satisfaction with his life relative to mine, where I had all these things, where I was able to, get the new iPhone, and I was able to have what society would perceive to be an accomplishment. The contrast in our levels of satisfaction spoke to me, and it helped me understand that even if I don't succeed, even if I end up penniless, that there will be more satisfaction in having pursued who I wanted to be than there would be if I had great success doing something that I didn't perceive to be my own.
So I think a really, really important theme to pull out of this that I've talked about some in past episodes is this idea of success and defining it. Because the world is very good at defining what the word success means. But what's more important for people is they need to define success for themselves. So the world was looking at you saying, Dr. Noah Arnold is a veterinarian and he's very successful and he's working at this very prestigious clinic and he has a very nice house in this neighborhood and he has 2.3 children and well done, congratulations. But that doesn't matter because it's not your definition of success. And your definition of success is so much more important, because if you don't have that vision, it's hard to figure out day to day, what do I actually do? Like, how do I move forwards? What are the actions that I take? And I think that the other thing that's really, really important, that I think you, even if you haven't thought about it this way, that you've done in spades, and this is I feel like the step that most people miss, is why you are doing what you are doing. Most people are very clear on, well, this is what I do, right? I'm a veterinarian. Like anybody would say, what do you do? Well, I'm a veterinarian. Sure. Okay. So how do you do what you do? Well, I do it with dignity and with respect, and I treat blah, 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 right? Like all the stuff that you can put on a resume.
Sure.
But in order to really endure the things that you have endured, and the moment that I want to picture now is you've left that practice. You're literally sitting on the floor of this new clinic the night before it opens. You're thinking about, I can't even imagine the mountains of debt that you probably had to be in to open up a vet clinic with all the equipment and the rent. And I'm sure that number is a lot higher than $100,000.
Yeah.
And you're looking at all this and just
question.
all this pressure, but you knew why you were doing what you were doing, which makes all of the details endurable, because that why is so much more powerful than all those other things. So why is it that you do what you do?
I do what I do because I have been where I've been. I have felt what it feels like to not be listened to. I've felt what it feels like to not feel safe and to be belittled. And I wanted to create a space where people felt loved and listened to and comfortable. And I was finally in a position where I could do it, where I could, this wasn't about me as much as it was having compassion for not just the animals of the world, and even less so, which is surprising coming from a vet, that it's not so much about the animals as it is about these people. And the amount of guilt that people experience in relation to their pets, this sense of, I let this illness go on too long, I didn't notice the warning signs, I'm not feeding the right food, on and on and on. And to have that fear as you're walking into a vet clinic, to be judged by this pinnacle of animal care, people are terrified by it. They're terrified by disease, and they're terrified by the way they're going to feel as they're belittled. And I wanted to create something where people, rather than feeling worse about themselves as they left the clinic, that they would feel that they were good enough. And that is such a focus of what I do. The first thing I do when I go into an exam room is I sit on the floor and I say, how are you? And very often people go in to the condition of their pets. And I stop them and I say, no, how are you? And it often catches them by surprise. And I can't tell you the amount people open up to me, and the number of tears that are shed in that office that have nothing to do with animals. The stories about people's ailing parents, the stories about their own struggles with mental illness. And to be able to give them reassurance and validation, that's why I do what I do.
Man, you got me in tears over here. You're killing me.
Yeah.
That's so profound. And that's really what I'm trying to tap into. I'm usually trying to get my guests to cry, but man, you got me. But that's really what I think is so important, is that vision in your mind. And maybe you weren't literally thinking this, but again, going back to this analogy of you're sitting in your clinic the day before you turn the lights on, you have 0.0 clients and mountains of debt. But in your mind, you're not thinking, man, I hope this goes well so I can pay off my loans, or I can prove everybody wrong. To you, all I want to do is create a safe space of compassion for my clients and for my patients. And having that vision makes all the invoices that need to be filled out and the bills that need to be paid and the long hours, like all the stuff that gets in your way, all the obstacles and challenges, those don't look so hard when you think about what you're working towards.
No question. No question. And it has been my business plan from the beginning to not have a business plan. To just
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
that the money will come, and maybe it won't, but ultimately this is about the impact that I want to have on this world. This world that is so often cruel and unfeeling, that there is a ripple effect, and that by treating people in a certain way, it dictates the way they treat somebody else. And to have this beacon of energy that can just ripple, not just through the community, but through my online presence, through the world. That's what it's about.
Well, and speaking of your online presence, I'm going to make sure that anybody that's listening to this, if they go to the show notes, that they can see all of the different pieces that have been done about your work. Because even though you're in Shorewood, Wisconsin, I'm not even 100% sure what that is. I'm guessing you're still Southeast Wisconsin, right?
Yep. Yeah. It's just a couple miles north. I mean, it borders the city of Milwaukee. So it is just a northern suburb of Milwaukee.
Sure. So, and for most people listening, or at least a lot of the people even that I meet in LA, they're like, Wisconsin. Oh, that's a state, right? Is that in the Midwest? Like, right. So where it is in Wisconsin is immaterial because they're not even 100% sure they know what or where Wisconsin is. But the point is that the work you've done has gotten the attention of so many different people that you have news stories where you're sitting on the floor in your clinic playing a guitar for dogs and for cats and for all these people, like you said, to give them a feeling of comfort and being compassionate and giving them the space where they just feel safe. And that is going to reach to so many more people than just the physical clients that come into your office. So to me, that's part of the reason, if not one of the biggest reasons, that I really wanted you on the show, is that even if somebody has a dog or a cat in Los Angeles and they say, I'm never going to be able to go to that clinic, it sure sounds cool. But just imagine there's a veterinarian that sees that news story or listens to this in Los Angeles, and they're like, "Oh my God, that's me!"
Yeah,
like I've been trapped in this clinic, and I've always wanted to sing to animals, and I never felt like I had the permission to do it.
Yeah.
So thank you, Noah, for giving me the permission to do that.
Yeah. No question.
Well, on that note, I'm not sure I can handle another round of this because you've just emotionally exhausted me. But I just cannot thank you enough for being so open and so honest about your journey, because I really think whether or not somebody's building a business, whether or not they're working in a creative industry where they just don't feel like they fit and they can't be themselves, I really, really hope that you've inspired people to just take another look at how they're living their lives and whether or not they're truly being authentic and being the person that they want to be. So I cannot thank you enough for sharing your story, your struggles, your challenges, and now your triumphs. Before we go, if somebody wanted to learn more, whether they physically wanted to go to your office or they just want to learn more in general, where can I send them?
Yeah, so I have a clinic website, Dr. Noah's Ark, DrNoahsArk.com. And if you just Google, or if you go to Facebook and type in Dr. Noah's Ark, you'll be able to see these daily blogs that I do.
Yeah, and there's no question that if somebody wants to get to know you better, Facebook is the place to do it, because your entire life and the deepest depths of your heart and your being are in individual Facebook posts. And that is not an understatement.
No question. And, to that point, just one more thing quickly. I want to say that when I sit down with a client, when I sit down to write a Facebook post, when I sit down to write a song, I have no idea what I'm going to say. I have no idea what I'm going to write. These things come out of the air, and they come from, we've talked so much about being authentic. They come from just embracing what is inside of me. And I so often surprise myself by the things that come out of my mouth or out of my pen. And I wouldn't be able to find those things. I wouldn't be able to create these things that I've created without letting myself, just letting myself go. And I think that is the trick to the success that that people are looking for is to not focus on the success, to focus on authentically being yourself, and that's what the world is searching for. That's what each of us are searching for, is to be comfortable in our skin. And by projecting that, by being that, uh, the world turns and takes notice.
I couldn't have written it better myself if I spent a year scripting this interview. That is like the best way to close it whatsoever. So on that note, I want to thank you once again for taking the time out of your day, especially away from your patients, your clients, and of course, your family and your kids. So thank you so much for being with me today.
All right. Thanks, Zach. Nice talking to you.
Thank you for listening to episode 57 of the Optimize Yourself podcast. To access the various links and resources that were mentioned in this episode, please visit optimizeyourself.me/episode 57. If you enjoyed this episode, I want to remind you before you go to help support future episodes by leaving an honest review of the show in iTunes or Apple Podcasts. If you do leave a review, you're going to be entered to win a yearly subscription to Adobe Creative Cloud, an essential package of video creation tools that I personally cannot live without. Whether you're cutting your very first clip, you're creating Hollywood blockbusters such as Deadpool, or you're making critically acclaimed shows such as Atlanta or Mindhunter, Adobe has the tools that you need to bring your stories to the web, TV, or to film. What's even cooler about Creative Cloud is how easily you can move from ingest to editing, and from color grading to 3D compositing, for example, thanks to all of the smooth integration between Premiere Pro, After Effects, and Audition. To learn more about the products that Adobe Creative Cloud has to offer, visit optimizeyourself.me/Adobe. And to win yourself that yearly subscription, just leave an honest review of this show in iTunes or Apple Podcasts. And if that isn't enough to get you excited, you can also enter to win the 12-month Pro Plan from my newest sponsor, Frame.io, an amazing online collaboration tool where you can comment and interact directly with your videos, providing instant feedback online, rather than constantly going back and forth via endless email chains. And you know how I feel about email and productivity. Even cooler, your comments can be imported directly into your editing software of choice, and it is so intuitive, easy to use, and dare I say pretty, that Frame.io even won an Apple Design Award. Stop patching together your email, your Dropbox, and Vimeo and YouTube, and instead just do yourself a favor and visit optimizeyourself.me/Frame.io. And for clarification, that's Frame.io with no periods or spaces. And do not forget to leave that podcast review in iTunes to be entered to win. Thank you for listening. Be well. This episode of the Optimize Yourself podcast was made possible for you by ErgoDriven, the makers of the TopoMat, my #1 recommendation for anybody interested in moving more at their height-adjustable workstation. Listen, standing desks are only great if you're standing well. Otherwise, you're constantly fighting fatigue and chronic pain. Not like any other anti-fatigue mat, the Topo is scientifically proven to help you move more throughout the day, which helps reduce discomfort and also increase your focus and productivity. I'm standing on one as I read this, and I don't go to a single job without it. And if you're smaller and you're concerned that the Topo mat is too big, or you simply don't have the floor space, there's a Topo Mini for that. To learn more, visit optimizeyourself.me/Topo. That's TOPO. This episode is also made possible for you by Sit Tight, the desk chair that has instantly become my #1 recommendation if you are searching for a healthier, more ergonomically friendly office chair. Sit Tight is an active sitting chair that uses your body's natural ability to balance to activate your postural muscles. You know, those are the muscles that hurt all the time because you're slouched over a keyboard all day long. Well, using the Sit Tight causes a significant increase in your heart rate, it increases brain activity, and it causes a sensation that's similar to riding a bike, which also brings just a bit of fun into the workplace. Simply put, the Sit Tight turns sitting into an activity that actually improves your health rather than damaging it, so you can get fit while you sit. If you want to learn more about this revolutionary new desk chair that I have fallen in love with and how it can provide fitness for your body, focus for your mind, and fun for your spirit, just visit optimizeyourself.me/sittight and use the coupon code OPTIMIZE for 10% off your order.